where you're watching from. Welcome to this edition of the Scott Ritter Show. It's July 18th, 2023, and as I think everybody's aware, Russia and Ukraine are still locked in a very deadly and expanding conflict. In the United States, we hold ourselves hostage, so to speak, to reporting that comes from the front lines, from the battlefield, by correspondents, by combat reporters, and we hold them in the high esteem. I mean, these are people that we have lionized over the years, dating back to World War II, when reporters like Ernie Pyle would accompany American forces to the front line to put their lives on the line to give us this information that we desperately needed about conflict, to bring perspective. And sometimes, like Ernie Pyle, they lost their lives because they got too close. They paid a price. But in America, we lionize these journalists. We give them awards. We give them Pulitzer Prizes. They write best-selling novels. And the last thing we call them are propagandists. We believe them to be truth tellers because they put everything on the line to be there, to see that which we can't see, and then explain it to us. Today, we're going to be joined by the Russian equivalent of Ernie Pyle. Alexander Kots is a legendary reporter. He is somebody that in the West, if you know of him, you denigrate him as a propagandist. That's how he's been sold by the American government, by European governments, by the press. But he's anything but. This is a man who, in the best tradition of combat journalism, has been there on the front lines, not just in Ukraine, but just give me a second to explain this so people watching understand. First of all, he served for 2 years as a Russian paratrooper. So as a war correspondent, he understands the military. In 2004, he was in Grozny when Akhmat Kadyrov was assassinated, and he was injured. That's how close he was to this story. Later in 2004, in the horrific events of Beslan, he not only reported on this tragedy, but he and a fellow journalist participated in the rescue of the children who were victims of this horror. He was in Georgia, the Republic of Georgia, in 2008 during the fighting there, where he was wounded, and he received an award from the Russian government for courage in his reporting there. This is an award that is given to combat soldiers for courage under fire. This was given to a journalist for his courage in covering this conflict. He reported from Syria, where he was credited with participation in this military operation. He was taken hostage in Libya. That's how close he came to reporting that. He was taken hostage and held hostage. He has been on the front lines around the world reporting the stories, including Ukraine. This is a man who has been there. He has seen firsthand what's going on, and yet we call him propagandist. I'd like to introduce him as probably the bravest war correspondent I've ever had the honor and privilege to meet. Alexander, thank you very much for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you about the conflict in Ukraine and your perspectives.
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, Scott. Thank you very much for your high esteem. It's my pleasure to participate in your show again. Let's have a talk, not to beat about the bush.
Absolutely. Well, let's start with the biggest story of the day. Crimea Bridge. Is this a sign of weakness on the part of Russia? I mean, the bridge was attacked once. It's a red line, but Ukraine has attacked it again. Russia last night carried out retaliatory attacks, but is that sufficient? Is this a turning point in the conflict? Is Ukraine regaining the initiative? Is this a sign of Russian weakness? Can Russia protect Crimea? What's going on with Crimea? Let's not beat around the bush.
большое поражение в большой войне, невозможно вести боевые действия и все время преуспевать в них, все время побеждать, потому что противник серьезный, противнику помогает
Adversary is formidable, and the collective West back them, and they have at hand all the state-of-the-art reconnaissance equipment and the reconnaissance data from NATO, and real-time adjustment from low-orbit satellite constellation of NATO. Definitely, you cannot preclude everything. Definitely, well, information-wise, it is a painful blow to Russia. It's the second time a major logistics main road is attacked that connects the mainland Russia with Crimea. Well, it's not only that, it's only a symbol of the reunification of Crimea, and that bridge that links mainland Russia with a small peninsula has always been a token thing for the whole of the country and for our president in particular. And from the perspective of info campaign and warfare, Ukraine will pump it as a success with the help of their special services. Well, at the same time, for them it is not a symbol, probably, but an important logistical artery that helps us supply to our southern group of troops in the Kherson and Zaporozhye regions, because the convoys with military equipment and munitions go through Crimea, as well as the replenishment of troops. So, in the course of all these months, Ukraine has been trying to cut that off, hence the first attack, when a truck full of explosive was blown up and a span sank, and one of the sides of the bridge was not operable, but still it kept functioning with the help of the other side. And they also tried to impact it with missiles, especially after they have received the Storm Shadow 1 week ago. They brought down several missiles over Kerch, and probably those were aiming the Crimea bridge from the side of Ukraine. But anyway, this seaborne attack was successful, has been successful. This is why probably we should look at other means that are effective to combat submarines. Let's look back at the history of the Second World War, when our underwater fleet was locked, our navy was locked in the Gulf of Finland, and the Germans cut it off with steel nets, and our submarine fleet was not capable of overcoming that. So now, given the advance in technologies and solutions, making it safer with the help of some mechanical obstacles or physical obstacles is a possibility. Unfortunately, the Russians have a saying, you wait for the first thunderbolt, and you won't cross yourself until that point of time. So now we have seen that and heard that thunderbolt, and we should cross ourselves and save ourselves from the underwater drones. But it hasn't been a military disaster, because the reverted flow is used now to go both ways. Definitely it's a hindrance, and the authorities have claimed that several months will be required to fully repair the bridge, but still we have the railway operating and the land corridor functioning via the People's Republic of Donetsk and Zaporozhye, and this corridor is safe at this point of time. In order for Ukraine to cut off all our supply routes in the southern front, it needs at least to control with fire the Mariupol-Melitopol trunk road. Over the past 40 days of the counter-offensive, Ukraine is not even close to reaching that outcome, and the land corridor works fine for the military and for civilian supplies of the Kherson region and Crimea, because the lorries didn't go via the Crimean bridge. They used the ferries or the land corridor, and the trucks will keep using that, and definitely that will tell are mostly on the civilians, because there will be a lot of road jams and congested roads, and now with the high season ongoing, well, the tourist will find it difficult to reach that, and the Crimea has always been our favored resort and granary for the Soviet people, and now in the changed economic context, many Russians can't afford to go abroad to have their vacations, and I'm one of these people. I've been relaxing in the Crimea over the past several years. It is a wonderful achievement and a good find for us. And, you know, the peaceful civilians will suffer most. They will face up to the jams and difficulties getting there. So from the perspective of strategy and warfare, definitely we should make conclusions. Definitely it is a reputation blow, but we should not be desperate and say that we have lost it all and the adversary now has an advantage. They do not have an advantage. The only point to mention is that I would like to have a more outspoken and straightforward response from Russia on that terrorist attack. And for us, it's a terrorist attack, and for Ukraine, it is a successful act of sabotage. But actually, we should retaliate, hit back, because the footage with the destroyed Crimean bridge has gone viral worldwide, and all the major news outlets have shown that, and it has been interpreted as a major success of the Ukrainian special services. At the same time, well, with respect to the retaliation strike, as the Defense Ministry calls it, we only saw a press release, and we saw the launch of missiles footage, and actually what the targets impacted have been is not clear. And for me as a journalist, this press release only adds up ambiguity and additional questions, because the press release spells out that strikes were carried out on a shipyard where those military underwater drones were produced, and also a depot, oil depot, or fuel depot. And why we have been impacting the shipyard and depot, only responding to Ukrainian terrorist attacks, is a question, because we should do that on a daily routine basis, destroying the military infrastructure of the enemy, and we do not need any pretexts for that. And Ukraine has shown that no red lines or breaks or stop signals are existent for them. They have been trying to do damage to our infrastructure on a daily basis, irrespective of what we have been doing. So we, in this context of the withdrawal from the grain deal, we should work for our future, not waiting for any moves by Ukraine in order to respond afterwards. We should embark on a systemic basis, work, and destroying the fuel depot and shipyards and docks and plants and the launch facilities must be destroyed. It should not be a retaliatory measure. It should be a systemic, routine measure, irrespective of what Ukraine has been doing. This is my personal view as a side observer who has been reading the press releases by the Defense Ministry and starts asking questions. And these questions definitely are frequently asked in Russian society, but our military apparatus, our machine is, you know, very clumsy. We're used to that, and it doesn't always do what the society expects it to do, and probably it should not, as it is actually a sensitive agency with their own standards. But if we speak about the information component of the conflict, unfortunately, here we actually trail our adversaries. With respect to the port infrastructure strikes, well, these strikes, well, they are wanted, they're asking for them, and since the start of the conflict, We have been prone to demonstrate chevalier attitudes and behavior. We have been riding the white horse and wearing white gloves, trying not to stain ourselves, but the adversary has shown that all the means will do for them. So I think that when we have seen the withdrawal from the grain deal, Ukraine will keep trying to use the sea navigation to export their grain and import arms by sea, given that the Russian Navy will not control and frisk and search the content of the ships anymore. Ukraine, I think, did everything possible so that we should withdraw, so that they are not under the eye of the Russian Navy, and they can carry anything by sea, anything they want. It's not accidental that Zelensky has turned the Turkish president and the United Nations so that they should continue exporting products and produce from the Ukrainian ports without Russian participation, and different options are on the table. I assume that Turkey may dole out military convoys to accompany Ukrainian vessels that will use the routes of the territorial waters of NATO countries like Bulgaria, and this will put us, Russia, in an awkward position. The only way to avoid that and to avoid arms supplies by seas, to destroy the port infrastructure of Ukraine, be it Odessa, Nikolaev, or any other sea port at the Black Sea coast. This is now a matter of life and death, of survival. And this is, something that Ukraine has been doing. We should sever this logistical chain, otherwise more bloodshed will be observed, and Ukrainian military machine will become more powerful. But this is the only thing that we should do. We should also respond in a more powerful way with respect to the bridges on Dniester River connecting the western Ukraine and central Ukraine. These are the bridges in the western Ukraine also that are used to supply flows of armaments from the Ukrainian backers. And we have not been doing that. I don't know the reason, but Ukraine has been showing and proving that they actually want to sever our supply lines, but unfortunately we do not retaliate. We don't never impact the bridges that are used for the Western supplies. We tried to bring down a bridge in Odessa and used missiles and sea drones. There was an attempt, but actually all of that were one-off things that yielded no tangible outcomes, and the tangible outcomes can be achieved and attained by systemic, routine work, planned work to destroy facilities. Well, some believe that bridges in Ukraine cannot be destroyed because we will use them for our offensive, but I don't see it's a foreseeable future, and I think when time is right for us to launch our offensive, Kyiv will blow them up on their own, and we will have to build any temporary bridge facilities. Just remember the Antonovsky Bridge, 142 impacts by HIMARS and Hurricane and other Olhan shells, 142 impacts. Still, the bridge withstood that, and our troops were able to pass to and fro. But indeed, destroying this logistics hub was their priority until we were present on the right bank, and now we have been using the ferry, which makes the supplies to the other shore more difficult. But the retaliatory response per se could have been more substantial and tangible, including info-wise.
Let's talk about the information and some of the things that you've raised. You know, when we discuss the Crimea Bridge, you've acknowledged that it was used to transport military equipment across the bridge, and yet Russia has called the Ukrainian attack a terrorist attack. And look, my heart goes out to the parents of the 14-year-old girl, Alexandra, who died in this attack. They were innocent civilians, and they shouldn't have died. But if we're going to be honest, the bridge is a critical line of communication. And from a military perspective, severing that line of communication is to the advantage of Ukraine. That is a military necessity. As is cutting off the land bridge. As you said, the Ukrainian objective in their counteroffensive was to bring under fire the highway going through Mariupol, Melitopol, connecting Donetsk with Crimea. That is a military objective. It's not a terrorist act. Could, and the problem with Russia using this kind of information war, calling it a terrorist act, is it ties their hands, as you said, when it comes to dropping the bridges over the Dnieper River. I think there's many people who look at the concentration of Ukrainian forces to the east of the Dnieper River and say the best way to destroy these forces would be to cut them off from their logistics west of the river by dropping the bridges. But Russia isn't dropping the bridges. There's many people who look at the attack on Odessa and say that you're not solving the problem, you're just addressing the symptoms, that to cure the disease of Odessa, Russia will have to militarily occupy Odessa, or else it will forever be used as a base from which to attack Crimea. Last night, 32 drones were launched from the vicinity of Odessa against Crimea. So is Russia its own worst enemy in this case? Because it seems that Russia has approached this conflict. They call it a special military operation. They say that it's not an invasion. It's not a full-scale war. But maybe it's time for Russia to start viewing it as a full-scale war, not in terms of mobilization of the Russian nation, but just how its military is used. Is it time for Russia to drop the bridges over the Dnieper? Is it time for Russia to occupy Odessa? And does Russia have the military capability to do this?
Well, this is the question that I have been asking for months in my reports and on my Telegram channel, and there are no logical answers. With respect to the wording, to the language, you have responded yourself that Russia legally is not in a war, is not waging a war, and Ukraine did not declare war on us either. On both sides, these are half-baked measures, and in Ukraine and in Russia, legally, it is not considered to be a classical military conflict or a war. So within those legal frameworks that the Russian authorities have, they call the attack against the Crimean Bridge a terrorist attack, because people, civilians, lost their lives, and it's not martial law in force in the Krasnodarsk region. So it's peaceful times, and they lost their lives, so it is a terrorist attack. We proceed from the reality, legal reality that we have, and actually the first attack against the Crimea was a classical terrorist attack with a civilian vehicle, a truck, full unloaded with explosives. As regards the scale of the hostilities on the Ukrainian territory, I've always had questions about how the resources are used by our military. Actually, let me exaggerate and say one caliber is used to impact one barrack, and 100 people will lose their lives. 10 caliber missiles will end with 1,000 troops, and that will take the Ukrainian authorities 2 days to mobilize people from bars in Odessa. mop them up from Odessa bars. It will take 2 days. And, 10 costly missiles are wasted. Actually, I think it would be wiser to send those caliber missiles into one and the same point of a Dniester bridge or other bridge in Izotsk, where arms from Romania are supplied, and 10 caliber missiles would be enough to impact powerfully and down the bridge and drop the bridge, and that would give better effect, because the 1,000 troops newly mobilized will need vehicles and tanks and rifles that are supplied across the bridges. So, to my mind, it would be more effective to strike the supply chains than barracks. But the military of ours have their own designs. I don't know all the picture. I have only some of the parts of that general picture in front of me. Well, with respect to the military capability, we have that, and it has been growing. We have demonstrated and shown good results with barraging munitions and the destroyed bridges where saboteurs that were used by saboteurs to cross the Russian border, and we have